The morning light in Caracas cuts through a heavy mist, revealing a scene that feels both ordinary and extraordinary. Rows of Venezuelan army tanks stand silently along the edge of a residential neighborhood, their long barrels aimed at nothing, yet heavy with meaning. What began as a military exercise has become a message. This is the Independencia 200 drill, ordered by President Nicolás Maduro amid rising tensions with the United States. Residents wake to the sound of diesel engines and clanking steel. Some peer out from balconies, phones in hand, filming the slow choreography of military hardware in their streets. Soldiers move in formation, uniforms crisp, faces set. It is part show of strength, part statement of sovereignty, a reminder that Venezuela remains on high alert. Maduro's government calls it a defensive measure, a precaution against what it describes as foreign aggression. The exercise, officials insist, is meant to honor Venezuela's independence, 2 centuries of resistance against external control. But the timing tells its own story. Just days earlier, Washington confirmed a new U.S. naval deployment in the Caribbean. The Pentagon says it is targeting drug trafficking routes. Caracas sees something else, the shadow of invasion. From the hilltops overlooking Caracas, armored columns glint under the sun. They carry the Venezuelan flag and the national crest, the horse rearing up, the olive branch raised, a symbol of unity, but also of warning. The camera pans slowly, capturing the juxtaposition. Heavy tanks beside small houses painted in fading colors, children watching from doorways, dogs running between the tracks of military vehicles. In the distance, a loudspeaker blares the voice of an officer giving commands. "We are ready to defend every inch of our land," he says. His words echo through the narrow streets carried on the wind. For some, it feels like theatre. For others, preparation for something darker. Over the past month, relations between Caracas and Washington have worsened sharply. U.S. officials have accused senior Venezuelan military figures of drug trafficking and corruption. In response, Venezuela expelled several American diplomats, accusing them of conspiracy and espionage. The rhetoric has turned familiar. Accusations of plots, of destabilization, of imperialist interference. Yet the images here in Caracas tell a more intimate story. A tank driver, barely in his 20s, leans from the hatch to share a cigarette with a fellow soldier. A mother hurries her children past the convoy, glancing nervously at the soldiers, but not stopping. In these quiet exchanges, the grand narratives of geopolitics collide with daily life. President Maduro, speaking during the exercise, declared that Venezuela will never kneel before any empire. His voice carried across national television, his message aimed as much at domestic audiences as at foreign ones. "We are a free people," he said, "and we will remain free, no matter who threatens us." It is a familiar script, one drawn from Venezuela's long tradition of anti-imperialist rhetoric, but behind it lies genuine uncertainty. The country's economy remains fragile, inflation high, and international isolation deep. Many Venezuelans remember the failed US-backed attempt to recognize opposition leader Juan Guaidó as interim president. That episode for Maduro's supporters became proof that Washington still seeks regime change. So when the US Navy announced its Caribbean patrols, the reaction in Caracas was swift. The government labeled it provocation. The military was placed on alert, and Independencia 200 was born, a massive nationwide exercise designed to project readiness and unity. Across the capital, soldiers rehearsed urban combat scenarios, defending infrastructure, securing neighborhoods, coordinating armored and infantry units. Helicopters hovered overhead, simulating air cover. Drone footage released by state media shows convoys snaking through narrow roads, tanks maneuvering past apartment blocks. To the casual viewer, it might look like a parade. To defense analysts, it signals that Venezuela is preparing for potential asymmetric conflict, fighting on home terrain among civilians. For now, though, the tanks are still. The soldiers pose for photographs, smiling beneath their helmets. But in every image, the subtext is unmistakable: deterrence. A reminder that in a world of sanctions and threats, Venezuela still has steel to show. Meanwhile, Washington's message has remained cautious but firm. US officials say the Caribbean deployment is part of Operation Resolute Sentinel, targeting transnational crime. They insist it is not directed at Venezuela, but in Caracas, such assurances fall flat. History, many here say, has taught them otherwise. The legacy of past interventions, calm from Panama to Grenada, looms large in the Venezuelan imagination. On state television, commentators replay footage of those invasions, drawing parallels and warning of déjà vu. They want to bring the same chaos here, one anchor declares. The narrative of resistance fuels the government's domestic legitimacy, even as the economy stumbles. Internationally, reactions are mixed. Russia and Iran have voiced support for Maduro, condemning what they call US aggression. Moscow has even hinted at deepening military cooperation, including joint training and intelligence sharing. In contrast, Colombia and Brazil, both uneasy neighbors, have urged restraint, calling for dialogue. The Organization of American States has convened emergency discussions, but as in the past, consensus remains elusive. Back on the streets of Caracas, dusk settles. The tanks now rest beneath flickering streetlights, their camouflage blending into the shadows. A few soldiers stand guard, rifles slung loosely over their shoulders. Children play soccer nearby, their laughter cutting through the tension. For a moment, the line between ordinary life and military theatre blurs completely. Observers say these images are carefully curated, part of a broader media strategy to rally nationalism and signal resolve. State broadcasters loop footage of the exercises with patriotic music and slogans, Leales siempre, traidores nunca, always loyal, never traitors. The message is unmistakable, loyalty to the revolution, to the flag, to the leader. But the symbolism extends further. Independencia 200 commemorates 200 years since Venezuela's liberation from Spanish rule, a period often invoked by Maduro as proof of the nation's revolutionary soul. The exercise, he says, honors the heroes who fought for our independence and the soldiers who now defend it. Yet analysts note the paradox. The tanks may project power, but they also expose vulnerability. Behind the steel and ceremony lies a military strained by years of sanctions, equipment shortages, and defections. Spare parts are scarce, maintenance inconsistent. Many of the tanks on display date back decades. Still, the message they carry, visual, political, psychological, remains potent. In the words of one retired general interviewed by AFP, power today is as much about perception as capability. What matters is not whether those tanks will roll, but that everyone believes they might. As night deepens, reporters gather near the cordoned-off zone. The hum of generators mixes with the sound of distant traffic. In interviews, residents express a mix of pride and apprehension. We want peace, says a woman selling a wrapper from a roadside stall, but peace with respect. A young man filming on his phone adds, let them see that we are not afraid. Inside the Ministry of Defense, officials release a short communiqué. The Bolivarian armed forces are in permanent readiness to defend the homeland against any external or internal threat. No further details are given, but everyone understands the subtext, a message aimed squarely at Washington. Across the Caribbean, American surveillance aircraft continue their patrols. At sea, a guided missile destroyer sails just beyond Venezuelan waters. On shore, the mood oscillates between defiance and fatigue. The country has lived through years of sanctions, blackouts, shortages, and yet somehow life persists. By the following morning, social media is awash with images of the tanks. Hashtags trend, hashtag Defensa Bolivariana and hashtag Independencia 200. Government supporters celebrate the display as proof of sovereignty. Critics dismiss it as propaganda, calling it a distraction from economic despair. Both sides, however, agree on one thing: the images are powerful. The symbolism resonates far beyond Venezuela's borders. For governments in Latin America wary of foreign interference, the exercise is a rallying cry. For Washington, it is a signal that its policies still shape the political temperature of the region. For ordinary Venezuelans, it is another reminder that geopolitics can unfold right outside their homes. Analysts predict that tensions are unlikely to cool soon. With US elections approaching and oil markets tightening, both Washington and Caracas see leverage in confrontation. Maduro gains domestic unity. Washington demonstrates resolve. Between these narratives, the people of Venezuela continue to live their daily lives between tanks and traffic, between slogans and survival. As the camera lingers on the final wide shot, the tanks lined up against the skyline of Caracas, the narration fades to a close. The voice of the journalist sums it up. This is Caracas, a city where history and uncertainty meet on the same street, where the machinery of defense becomes the language of politics, and where every tank parked beneath a window is both a shield and a signal that Venezuela, for better or worse, is preparing for whatever comes next.